Okay, so moving on from just showing a brief outline of what's going on in this opening, I thought I'd show the actual processing behind a couple of the instruments. So I thought we'd start off with the bass. So as I said previously, the way that we recorded the entirety of the bass for this whole track was quite unique, because we sort of took it in turns, going back and forth between me and Liam, using my Dingwall NG2. Basically gave the whole track a really metally sound, really consistent as well. Although the only thing with this whole recording session was, at the time, didn't get new bass strings for it, so they were a little bit old, so it was kind of lacking a little bit in the sort of cleaner high-endy section. So to compensate for that, I had to put in a fair bit of high-end with the EQ. This was in before the parallax. We were using the parallax for all of the album. So this basically just gave it a little bit of a boost, before then adding the parallax, basically just giving the DI a little bit of a cleaner sound. So I'll just, it's very subtle, so I'll just play a little bit of it just to give an idea. As I say, extremely subtle changes, but it just gave it a little bit of a brightness that we were looking for, and it does look quite extreme. I mean, the additions that I did were basically on ear, just what sounded right, and I just kept sort of just adding until I got the right sort of brightness, with the contrast of adding the parallax into the equation. So it was a lot of back and forth of adding in the parallax, taking it out, until we got the right sort of sound. I'm also notching a couple of frequencies here, just because they were a little bit too abrasive. So taking them out, just so that adding the distortion of the parallax didn't create a really sort of a harshness that we didn't want. So that was the entire process, really, of recording the bass. This was the main sound, the main body of the entire recording that we went for with the bass. I started off with a preset, the Spasm preset, because it was basically just the first one that we came to that was really heavy, sounded really cool. So we kind of went, yep, let's go with that. And I sort of shaped it from there. Just adding what sounded good for the sound. So I think we got a good result overall with the sound of that bass recording. I'll play a little bit later on for this, when it starts to get a little bit juicier, just to give you an idea. And as you can see, I'm really honing the gate in there to really give it a sort of a very genty sort of tone there, to use a better word. And I think it comes across really well for this whole recording, as I say. So yeah, So that's the bass for the introduction. There is obviously a lot more going on the bass that I'll come to later on. We really went all out with this recording, giving it absolutely 110% and possibly more than that. So moving on to the guitars section in terms of the processing, I'm kind of keeping it quite simple. Everything is bussed quite nicely just to keep things nice and tight. For the 8-string section, the really gentler sections of the guitars, I'm adding a fair amount of compression to them, again to sort of add a really slappy sound to it when the gentler sections of this track come out sort of later on. The ratios hit pretty high. Attack isn't too ridiculous. I could have gone a little bit more with it. Threshold's hitting quite hard around 7 dB. But I think it works quite nicely, bringing a really tight sound to it. And again, I'll give you a little bit of an example of a sort of jauntier section a little bit later. So it sort of adds, like I say, a little bit more slappiness to the sound, makes it a little bit tighter, bringing in it all together. Other than that, EQ wise, keeping it pretty simple, cutting off a fair bit of the high end, which was quite heavy in the tone that Liam decided to use. So I decided to sort of take quite a lot of that out quite harshly, up to about 8K, cutting a bit of low end, but not too much, just to kind of keep the whole sort of genty sound going. I didn't want to sort of go too extreme with it, for that exact reason, and I think it works really nice in the whole sort of sound, I think. So moving on to the ambient guitars, again, I'm not really doing too much to the overall sound of these guitars. I mean, what Liam had recorded was quite adequate and sounded really decent. I am doing quite a harsh cut around 300 hertz here, because the whole sort of 250 to 600 700k region I've always found can be quite problematic and be quite boxy, especially when you're adding a lot of reverb to things, and these guitars, the ambient guitars, are extremely drenched in reverb. So taking that out, I think, was quite a good necessity in order to keep the whole sound quite tight and even. So I'll give you a little bit of an example with and without. So you can hear there, it's just a lot more tighter. It almost gives a sort of like synthesizer sort of effect rather than actually a guitar, which was the whole idea of having those ambient guitars. And also this massive cut to the low end was extremely necessary, I think, because it cut out the hits of the pick on the strings, which you could have if you wanted that, but again, to give it that sort of more synthesized effect, I thought it was a good idea to take that out and I don't know if you could hear it, but this particular frequency band, when I took that out, there was a very, very, very shrill notch going on, which was why there is a extremely harsh cut going on here to take it out of the equation. Prepare your ears. I'll put it up just to give you an example. In fact, I don't think you even needed it. I think you could hear it quite clearly when I took the EQ out, but I'll show you an example now. So they're extremely shrill, and in the overall mix, that kept cutting through really, really harshly. So I was there for quite a while, just going around, which is something I do quite often with most instruments, particularly guitars, for what we're doing. But there's always a frequency or two that are just absolutely shrill to the ears and just need to go just to tidy things up, and that was the one, and you can really hear the difference with and without. So again, it's really subtle things that I've done to this, apart from the odd surgical removing of frequencies, which was 100% necessary and made a huge difference to the overall sound. So it was definitely worth doing. So moving on. Lastly, for this section, we have the leads. And again, I'm not doing anything particularly outlandish, really. I did add a reverb section to this, quite a harsh one, just to really make the whole leads as almost operatic as possible, because they are taking the role of the vocals in what we do. So I thought it was quite important to to invent that as much as possible. So I was experimenting quite a lot, adding reverb, adding delays as well, just trying to make it as big as possible, almost like I say, almost like an operatic Pavarotti sort of thing. And I thought it came out quite nicely overall. So you can kind of hear it going from very central, almost mono without it, to filling the ears in a big stereo sense, which I really wanted to try and do, because although the guitar is the main focus, I thought it was a really cool idea to sort of just broaden it as much as possible while keeping it central. So not playing too much with the mix and the feedback and things like that to make it too archaic and too chaotic in the ears, but just to make it broad and, like I said, I keep using the phrase, but giving it an operatic sort of feel to the whole sound, and I think it worked. I think it worked quite well. Other than that, again, I'm keeping it really, really simple on the EQ. Almost, in fact, this may have actually been copied and pasted from the rhythm guitar EQ, with maybe a slight addition of high end and a slightly bigger cut on the low end. But that's really about it. I mean, the recordings that Liam did were really, really, really well done. So it didn't really warrant doing too much to them to interfere with the actual sound, because they were already really well done, which is, I think, a really important thing when you're doing recording. If you're recording a band, you want to try and get as best result as possible at the get-go, so you don't have to go back and do 1,000,001 things to manipulate the sound to make it sound right. You just want to get it right in the first place, and then you just make small adjustments just to make it even more epic. And that's exactly what we achieved with this album. I think this is the first time where we actually managed, or at least one of the first times we actually managed to do that as a band. And it was so amazing to be able to work on this because of that. I'll give you a little example of a little bit later, a section where there's a couple of panned lead guitars also, just to give you an idea, just to how awesome it sounds with the reverb on and things like that. So there you go. That's really pretty much it for the guitar processing that I'd done, and the bass processing. So I'll move on to maybe a little bit of the drums for the next bit, and some of the synthesizers that we ended up using, a little bit of the production around that. There's a really cool section a little bit later on in the, what I like to call the Genty Goodness section, where we really went mental with production and recording a load of weird sounds. We even toyed with the idea of Liam toyed with the idea of recording a toilet flush to go into that section, just to give it a really, really big smack in the face. Unfortunately, I don't think it made it into the final recording, but it was that level of mentalness that we were going for for the whole album. So there you go. That's a little bit further on the guitar mixing and the bass mixing. Next time we'll do a little bit of the synthesizers. So we'll see you then.